The spaceport was alive with noise. Alien ships came and went, their engines roaring like thunder. Merchants shouted about their goods. Guards barked orders, and travelers hurried past each other without a second glance. But today, there was a strange tension in the air. It was as if the whole place was holding its breath. Ethan Cole stepped off the transport shuttle and instantly felt it. People were whispering in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward the landing strip. Some aliens even pulled their children away, hiding them behind their cloaks. Ethan frowned. He had seen fear before, but this was different. This was pure terror. Then he saw her, a tall, powerful woman with silver armor that caught the light like fire. Her skin was the color of storm clouds, and her long dark hair moved like smoke behind her. 2 jagged scars crossed her cheek. But instead of making her ugly, they made her look even more dangerous. Her golden eyes scanned the crowd like a predator, searching for prey, and wherever her gaze landed, people looked away. Zira Vorsk, the most feared woman in the galaxy, warlord, conqueror, leader of a fleet that had burned planets to ash. Even her own people spoke her name with caution. She had destroyed entire armies and left their bones in the dust. Her guards, huge alien soldiers, moved around her in a tight circle, their weapons ready. The crowd parted before them, no one daring to stand too close. Ethan knew her reputation. Everyone knew, if you crossed Zira Vorsk, you didn't get a second chance. And yet, she was walking straight toward him. Ethan's first instinct was to step aside like everyone else, but something stopped him. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe stupidity, maybe both. Instead of moving, he stood there, holding her gaze. She stopped. A few feet away, her eyes locking on his. The spaceport seemed to fall silent for a moment. Neither of them moved. The crowd watched in disbelief. Ethan could feel the weight of her stare pressing against him, testing him. Every instinct screamed at him to look away, to drop his eyes, but he didn't. He just stood there, calm, or at least pretending to be calm. And then she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a predator gives before it pounces. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A man beside Ethan muttered under his breath, "He's dead." But Zira spoke in a voice low and sharp, "Bring him." Her guards moved at once, surrounding Ethan before he could react. One of them grabbed his arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to let him know there was no escape. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but the guard simply said, "Quiet, human," and pushed him forward. They led him through the spaceport, past rows of ships, toward a massive vessel that seemed to blot out the sun. Its black metal hull was covered in strange alien symbols, and its heavy cannons looked like they could tear apart a small moon. Ethan's heart pounded. Why was she taking him? Was he going to be questioned? Killed? Used as a hostage? Inside the ship, the air was colder, filled with the faint hum of engines. Zira walked ahead without looking back, her long cloak flowing behind her. Her soldiers pushed Ethan into a wide, dimly lit corridor. Finally, she stopped and turned up close. She was even more intimidating. Her golden eyes seemed to burn into his very soul. "You are mine now," she said, her voice calm but absolute. Ethan blinked, confused. What?" he managed to say. Zira stepped closer until she was only inches away. "You heard me," she said. "From this moment on, you belong to me." Her words sent a chill down his spine. He didn't know if she meant as a prisoner, a servant, or something else entirely. All he knew was that his life had just taken a turn he could never have imagined, as her guards led him deeper into the ship. Ethan glanced back at the spaceport one last time. The crowd was still watching, their faces pale with fear and shock. And Ethan realized something. Whatever this was, there was no turning back. He was stepping into the heart of danger, and danger had a name: Zira Vorsk. The door to Ethan's new quarters slid open with a hiss. It wasn't a cell, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. A single bed, a small table, and a round window showing the endless darkness of space. The walls were smooth metal, cold too. The touch, there was no lock on the inside, which meant the only way out was if someone allowed it. 2 guards stood at the doorway, their alien eyes watching him without blinking. One of them spoke in a deep voice. "Wait here. The commander will come for you." Ethan sat on the bed, his mind spinning. He had just been claimed like property by the most feared woman in the galaxy, and she hadn't explained why. Minutes or maybe hours passed before the sound of boots echoed in the corridor. The guard stepped aside, standing perfectly straight. Zira Vorsk entered, her presence filling the small room like a storm. She didn't bother with a greeting. "Come with me," she ordered. Her voice leaving no room for argument, Ethan followed her through the ship's long, curving corridors. They passed crew members who quickly moved out of the way, bowing their heads. Some of them gave Ethan sharp, curious glances. Others looked at him with open hostility. It was clear they didn't understand why their commander had brought a human aboard. Neither did Ethan. They entered a large chamber filled with star maps projected in midair. Bright points of light marked planets, trade routes, and enemy territories. Zira stepped up to the central console and tapped a command. A red circle flared. "Around the cluster of systems, these are my enemies," she said, her voice cold. "They've been moving against me, and I need to decide my next strike." Ethan hesitated, unsure why she was telling him this. "I don't see what that has to do with me," he said carefully. Zira turned to face him, her golden eyes burning. "It has everything to do with you, human," she said. "I've decided you will be my advisor." Ethan blinked in disbelief. "I'm not a soldier. I'm not a strategist," he said. But Zira only smirked. "You are human, and humans think differently. Your people survived countless wars on a death world. I've read your history. Your kind wins battles you should not win." Her words made his stomach tighten. This wasn't about affection or mercy. This was about usefulness. She wanted his mind, his ideas, and refusing her didn't seem like an option. Zira leaned over the map, her voice low. "If you serve me well, you will live like a prince. If you betray me, you will die quickly." Her tone made it clear there was no middle ground. Ethan studied the glowing map. The red-marked worlds formed a tight cluster. It reminded him of a strategy from an old Earth war. Hit the supply lines, he said before he could stop himself. Cut them off from food and fuel. They'll fall without you ever having to invade. Zira's head tilted. A slow, dangerous smile curved her lips. "That is clever," she said. She turned to her generals, who had been standing silently at the edge of the room. "Prepare the fleet, we strike the supply lines." The generals gave Ethan unreadable looks before bowing and leaving the room. When the two of them were alone again, Zira stepped closer. "You see, human, this is why you are mine," she said. "Others fear me, but you give me something far rarer: victory without waste." Ethan didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified. Her words sounded almost like praise, but the way she said "mine" sent a shiver down his spine. He was an asset to her now, and assets were valuable but also expendable if they stopped being useful. Zira walked toward the door, then paused. "You will be given your own cabin next to mine," she said. Ethan blinked. "That's close," he replied cautiously. She looked back at him, her eyes locking with his. "That is the point," she said simply. Before leaving, as the door closed behind her, Ethan let out a slow breath. His life had changed in a single day. He was now living aboard the flagship of the most dangerous woman in the galaxy. And she had claimed him in front of her entire crew. To them, that made him important, but also a target. He turned toward the window and stared out at the stars. somewhere out there were the enemies Zyra planned to crush, and now, whether he liked it or not, he was part of her war. The strange thing was, a part of him wanted to see what would happen next. Ethan woke to the low hum of the ship's engines. The room Zyra had given him was larger than the one before, with smooth black walls and a view of the stars stretching forever. It should have felt luxurious, but the two guards outside his door reminded him it was still a cage. The air smelled faintly of metal and strange alien oils, a constant reminder that he was far from home. A sharp chime sounded, and the door slid open. Zyra stood there, dressed in a dark armored suit that shimmered faintly under the light. "Walk with me," she said, her tone more like a command than an invitation. Ethan followed her through the ship's corridors. Crew members stepped aside quickly, bowing or lowering their eyes. Some stared at him with suspicion, others with open dislike. It was clear they didn't approve of a human walking beside their commander. They entered a large room filled with glowing star maps. Dozens of her officers stood around the central table, speaking in low, urgent voices. When Zyra stepped in, the room went silent. She gestured for Ethan to join her at the table. "This is the situation," she said, pointing to a cluster of glowing red marks on the map. "Our scouts report enemy fleets gathering near the rim worlds." Ethan studied the map, his brow furrowing. He noticed something the others seemed to overlook: a gap in the enemy's movement. "They're pulling their ships away from this sector," he said quietly. "They're leaving it undefended." One of the alien officers scoffed. "Humans see patterns where none exist," he said, but Zyra raised a hand, silencing him. "Explain," she told Ethan. Ethan leaned forward, pointing at the gap. "They want you to think this is a weak point, but it's bait," he said. "If you send your fleet here, they'll circle around and trap you from both sides." Zyra's golden eyes narrowed in thought. She tapped the console, and a simulation played out exactly as Ethan predicted. Several officers exchanged uneasy glances. Zyra turned to them with a sharp smile. "You see why he is here," she said. "From now on, every battle plan goes through him." The room murmured in agreement, though Ethan could feel the tension in the air. He had just stepped into dangerous territory. Earning the respect of Zyra meant also earning the envy of her crew. After the meeting, Zyra led him down a side corridor to a balcony overlooking the ship's main hangar. Below them, soldiers trained, with blasters and blades, their movements sharp and precise. "You saw the trap before my generals did," Zyra said quietly. "That makes you valuable, Ethan, but it also makes you a target." He glanced at her, seeing something in her expression: concern. "Maybe. Though quickly hidden, you think someone on your crew might try something?" he asked. Zyra's lips curved in a cold smile. "I don't think," she said. "I know. Power breeds jealousy, and jealousy breeds danger." Ethan rested his hands on the railing, staring down at the soldiers. "This isn't the life I chose," he said softly. "But it's the life you have now," she replied. "Learn to survive it." Later that day, Zyra summoned him to her private strategy room. The lights were dim, and the star maps cast a soft glow on her face. She poured 2 glasses of an alien drink that shimmered blue in the light. Ethan took a cautious sip. It was sweet at first, then burned like fire. He coughed, and she laughed, a sound low and warm. "You humans are too easy to unsettle," she teased. "Or maybe you just enjoy watching me struggle," he replied. Her golden eyes held his for a long moment. Oh, and for the first time, he thought he saw something gentle in them. But before he could speak, the ship's alarm blared. A voice over the comm shouted, "Enemy ships, inbound Sector 5. Zyra set her glass down and tapped her wrist communicator. "All hands to battle stations. Shields to maximum," she ordered. She turned to Ethan. "You stay here," she said. But he shook his head. "If I'm going to be part of this, I need to see it." Her gaze hardened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she led him to the command deck through the massive forward windows. Ethan saw them sleek black enemy ships dropping out of hyperspace. Weapons glowing, the crew moved like a single organism, hands flying over controls, voices calling out shield levels and targeting data. Ethan's heart pounded, but his mind stayed sharp. "They're testing your defenses," he said. "They won't commit their full force yet. They're looking for weakness." Zira gave him a quick glance. "Then we'll give them nothing to find," she said. Her voice was steel. But her hand rested briefly on his shoulder. It was only for a second. Yet it made something in his chest tighten. The battle began. Bright flashes lighting the darkness of space. Ethan stood beside her as the ship shook under enemy fire, and in that moment he realized something. He was no longer just a human caught in her world. He was becoming part of it. The enemy ships moved like dark shadows across the stars. Their weapons flashed, sending streams of plasma toward Zyra's flagship. The hull shuddered under the impact, the deck vibrating beneath Ethan's feet. He gripped the edge of the console to keep his balance. Around him, the crew shouted status reports, their voices sharp with urgency. Zira stood in the center of the command deck, her posture unshaken, her golden eyes locked on the tactical display. "Return fire target their lead ship," she ordered. The flagship's massive cannons roared, shaking the air. Ethan watched the blast tear across space and slam into the enemy vessel. The enemy ship's shields flared, then failed as fire erupted along its side. But more enemy ships were already closing in. "They're trying to flank us," Ethan said quickly, pointing to the display. Zyra nodded once. "Adjust formation, cut them off before they circle behind," she commanded. Her officers moved instantly, the fleet shifting like a predator turning on its prey. A sudden explosion rocked the ship, sending Ethan stumbling. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and the smell of burning metal filled the air. "Deck 7 has been breached," a voice cried over the comm. Zyra's jaw tightened. "Seal the section. Arm the internal defenses," she snapped. But another voice cut in. "They've boarded us." The crew's movements became frantic. Ethan felt a cold weight in his stomach. He had never been in the middle of a boarding attack before. Zira turned to him, her voice low but fierce. "You stay here. Do not leave the command deck." But he shook his head. "If they're already inside, then nowhere is safe," he said. Before she could reply, the doors to the command deck burst open. A squad of enemy soldiers in black armor charged in, weapons raised. The crew scattered for cover, drawing blasters of their own. The sound of gunfire filled the air, loud and sharp. Zyra moved like lightning, drawing a curved blade from her hip. She cut down the first soldier before he even saw her coming. Ethan's heart pounded. One of the enemy fighters aimed at him. He dove behind a console, grabbing the fallen blaster of a wounded crewman. He had never fired one of these weapons before. But instinct took over. He squeezed the trigger, and a bolt of blue energy hit the attacker square in the chest. The soldier fell, unmoving. More enemies poured in, but the defenders fought back hard. Zyra's movements were brutal and precise, her blade flashing under the deck lights. Every strike she made was lethal. Ethan stayed low, firing at enemies who tried to flank her. Once, she glanced over her shoulder at him, and he thought he saw a flicker of approval in her eyes. After what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, the last enemy soldier fell. The command deck was filled with smoke, the air hot from the exchange of fire. Bodies lay scattered across the floor. Ethan's arms ached from the weight of the blaster. His breathing heavy, he looked at Zyra, who was wiping her blade clean on the fallen enemy's cloak. "You fight like one of us," she said quietly, her voice carrying over the silence. Ethan didn't know if it was meant as praise, but it felt like it. "I just didn't want to die," he replied. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "That's the first step toward surviving in my world," she said. The cum crackled again. Enemy ships retreating. Cheers erupted across the deck, but Zyra didn't cheer. She turned to the tactical display, studying the retreating ships with narrowed eyes. "This wasn't their full force," she murmured. "They were testing us." Ethan stepped closer. "Then they'll be back," he said. Zyra met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Yes," she replied. "And next time, they'll bring more," as the crew began clearing the deck and tending to the wounded. Zyra motioned for Ethan to follow her. She led him through the halls, past scorched walls and shattered doors. They stepped into a quiet observation room overlooking the stars. For a moment, she didn't speak. Finally, she said, "Today, you proved you're more than a voice in my war council. You stood your ground when others would have hidden." Ethan didn't know what to say. Her tone was softer than before, but there was still that sharp edge beneath it. "Does that mean I've earned your trust?" he asked. She turned her gaze back to the stars. "No," she said after a moment. "But you've taken the first step toward it." The silence between them was not uncomfortable. Outside, the stars drifted slowly past, and for the first time since he had met her, Ethan wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was where he was meant to be. The battle was over, but the weight of it lingered in the air. Ethan sat alone in his quarters, staring at the faint glow of the stars beyond the window. His hand still remembered the recoil of the blaster, the heat of the shots, the ringing in his ears from enemy fire. He hadn't come here by choice. But each day pulled him deeper into Zyra's world, and every day she seemed less like the monster the galaxy claimed she was. A soft chime broke the silence. The door slid open, and Zyra stepped inside. She was no longer wearing her armor, only a dark flowing robe, her hair unbound and falling over her shoulders. The fierce commander was gone, replaced by someone quieter. "Come with me," she said, her voice low. Ethan followed her through dim corridors until they reached a room he had never seen before. The walls were lined with shelves of strange objects, alien weapons, shards of broken metals, tattered banners. Each one seemed to carry a story. Zyra walked to a glass case and touched it gently. Inside was a single rusted chain. "This," she said softly, "was around my neck when I was a slave." Ethan froze. She had never spoken of her past. The galaxy knew her as a ruthless warlord, not as someone who had once been powerless. "They took me from my family when I was 8, she continued. "I learned to fight because it was the only way to survive." She moved to another case, this one holding a small dagger with a cracked handle. "This belonged to the first friend I ever had," she said, her voice tightening. "They killed him in front of me, and I swore I would never be weak again." Ethan didn't speak. He could see the shadow of pain in her golden eyes, behind the armor and the cold commands. There was a woman who had bled, who had lost, and suddenly her need for control made sense. Zyra turned toward him. "Do you know why I claimed you?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Because you looked at me and did not see a monster," she said. "You looked at me like I was a person." The words struck him deeper than he expected. He thought back to their first meeting at the spaceport, the way she had stared at him, testing him, maybe. He said slowly, "I just didn't believe the stories." Her lips curved faintly. "Stories are powerful," she said, "but they are rarely the whole truth." They stood in silence for a moment. Then she stepped closer, the air between them charged with something neither wanted to name. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "If you were one of my people, Ethan, I would make you my mate." His heart skipped a beat. The words were unexpected, heavy with meaning, but before he could respond, her wrist communicator chimed. Breaking the moment, she turned away sharply. Answering the call, her expression hardened again as she listened. When she spoke, her voice was back to that of the commander, Understood. I'll deal with it. She ended the call and faced him. One of my captains is acting against me, she said. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? It means, she replied coldly, that betrayal is close. The vulnerability from moments before was gone, hidden behind her armor of command. But Ethan had seen it, and no matter how hard she tried to hide, he now knew the truth. Yura Vorsk was more than the galaxy's most feared woman. She was someone who had fought her way out of chains, and she still carried the weight of every scar as they left the room of relics. Ethan glanced back at the rusted chain in the glass case. It was a reminder of where she came from, and of how far she was willing to go to never be powerless again. And he realized something else. If she trusted him enough to show him this part of herself, then he was no longer just a pawn in her war. He was something more. The day after Zyra revealed her past, the ship felt different. The corridors seemed quieter. The crew's voices lower, as if everyone sensed something was about to happen. Ethan walked the passageways with 2 guards at his side, but he noticed the stairs. Some eyes were sharp with resentment, others cold with calculation. He remembered Zyra's warning, jealousy breeds danger. When he arrived at the mess hall, the air was tense. Conversations stopped the moment he stepped in. He picked up a tray, but the guards stayed close, scanning the room for threats. Halfway through his meal, a voice came over the ship's comm, urgent and clipped. Commander Vorsk to the bridge, immediately. Ethan had no reason to be alarmed until he saw the look on one of the guards. Vasuza flicker of unease. Stay here, the guard said, moving toward the door. But the second guard didn't follow. Ethan noticed his hand resting on the hilt of a blade. Too tightly, too ready. Before Ethan could react, the guard lunged. The tray clattered to the floor as Ethan rolled aside. The blade sliced the air where his chest had been. Chairs crashed and crew members shouted. Ethan grabbed the nearest thing. He could a metal mug and threw it at the attacker. It hit him in the face. Buying just enough time to run, he dashed into the corridor, heart pounding. The traitorous guard chased after him. Blade gleaming under the lights, Ethan turned a corner sharply, nearly colliding with another crew member. The man looked ready to block his path till Ethan saw the same cold hostility in his eyes. This wasn't just one attacker. Someone had planned this. A voice roared over the intercom, filled with fury. Find him. Bring me the human alive. It wasn't Zyra's voice. It was a man's, deep and sharp. One of her captains, Ethan guessed. A coup, he realized. They weren't after the ship. They were after her through him. He ducked into a maintenance tunnel, crawling through the narrow space. The air was hot, smelling of oil and metal. Every clang of his movement sounded too loud. Shouts echoed behind him. His pursuers were closing in. He crawled faster, his hands scraping against the metal floor. Then a blast door slammed shut ahead of him. Trapped, he turned, gripping a loose metal pipe. The first attacker dropped into the tunnel. His blade raised. Ethan swung the pipe hard. Catching the man's wrist, the blade clattered to the ground. Ethan kicked it away, then swung again, knocking the man unconscious. But more were coming. He could hear them pounding on the hatch above. Then, over the comm, another voice, this time Zyra's, cut through the chaos. Hold your positions. All of you. Her voice was ice and steel. Any man who touches him will lose his hands. The pounding above stopped, replaced by tense silence. A moment later, the hatch ripped open, not by the attackers, but by Zyra herself. She dropped into the tunnel like a shadow, her curved blade already drawn. Her golden eyes burned with fury. Come with me, she said, her tone leaving no space for argument. They moved quickly through the tunnels, Zyra in front, her movements sharp and deadly. When an enemy appeared in their path, she cut him down in a single motion. Ethan kept close, his pulse racing. By the time they emerged back into the main corridors, the deck was littered with unconscious or dead traitors. Zyra's loyal guards were already securing the area. On the bridge, she stood before her officers, her voice carrying the weight of command. "Captain Rail has betrayed this ship," she announced. "He will face execution at dawn." Her gaze swept over the crew. "Let this be a lesson. Any who plot against me will answer with their blood." When the crew dispersed, she turned to Ethan, her tone softened. Though her eyes were still hard, "They thought taking you would weaken me." She said, "They thought wrong." Ethan exhaled slowly. "You came for me yourself," he said quietly. Her gaze locked on his. "I will always come for you," she replied, the words low but certain in that moment. Ethan understood something. Whatever he was to Zyra, advisor, companion, symbol, he had become more than a tool in her war. He was someone she would fight for. And that made the galaxy an even more dangerous place. The ship sailed through deep space, quiet after the chaos of the betrayal. Ethan stood in the observation deck, watching the stars drift past like silver dust. The galaxy outside was calm, but inside the flagship, tension still lingered. Zyra's enemies had been rooted out, yet whispers spread in the halls. Some feared the human had too much influence over their commander. Others feared what the commander herself might do next. Ethan didn't care about their whispers. What mattered was that she had come for him herself, blade in hand when he was in danger. He kept seeing that moment in his mind. The way she had cut through her enemies without hesitation, the way her eyes had softened only when they landed on him. Footsteps approached, and he didn't need to turn to know it was her. Zyra's reflection appeared in the glass beside him, her armor gleaming faintly under the dim lights. "You should be resting," she said, her voice calm. "I couldn't sleep," he replied. "Too many thoughts." She studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "I'm making an announcement tomorrow," she said. He turned toward her, curious. "What kind of announcement?" "One that will silence the whispers," she said, her gaze never leaving his. The next day, the entire crew was summoned to the Grand Assembly Hall. The room was vast, filled with soldiers, officers, and workers. The air buzzed with curiosity and unease. Ethan stood near the side, unsure why she had asked him to be there. Then Zyra entered, every head bowing as she walked to the center platform. Her voice carried over the hall. "There has been betrayal in our ranks," she began. "But there has also been loyalty that I will never forget." Her golden eyes swept the crowd, and then she said, "This human," she pointed toward Ethan, "is mine not as property, not as a pawn, but as my equal." The hall went silent. Murmurs broke out almost immediately. Some shocked, some angry. To declare someone an equal, especially a human, was unheard of. Ethan's heart pounded. He hadn't expected her to say that in front of everyone. Zyra's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "From this day forward, any threat to him is a threat to me. No one touches him unless they wish to. Face my wrath." Her words left no room for doubt. Ethan stepped forward, unsure if he should speak. But when he met her eyes, something passed between them, silent understanding. She had risked her authority to protect him. He couldn't let the moment pass without answering. "I didn't choose to be here," he said to the crowd, his voice steady. "But I've seen who she really is. Not the monster you fear, but a leader who fights for her own. I stand with her." The silence deepened. And slowly, one by one, soldiers began to bow, not just to Zyra, but to him as well. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough to send a message. Zyra's lips curved in the faintest smile. "This meeting is over," she declared, turning away. Later, in the quiet of her private quarters, Zyra poured them both a drink. "You've made enemies today," she said without looking at him. "I already had enemies," he replied, taking the glass. Her eyes met his, and this time there was no commander's mask. only the woman he had begun to understand. "You claimed me the day you looked into." "My eyes without fear," she said softly. Ethan's chest tightened at her words. "I didn't know what I was getting into," he admitted. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled faintly. "Now, I'm not leaving." They stood together at the window, the galaxy stretching endlessly before them. Her hand brushed against his, and for a moment, neither of them moved. It wasn't a confession, not yet, but it was a promise. A promise that whatever came next, they would face it side by side in the shadows of her warship. The most feared woman in the galaxy had given her heart to a human, and somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew he had given his to her as well.